Okay, so I'm back. I'm getting ready to reassemble this engine and put the bottom end back together. I just wanted to make a note in the form of this video to make sure that I cover every step of reassembly. So what I've done so far is these journals here for the main bearings, these journals here for the conrod bearings. I used a plastic gauge meter. I torqued them all, rechecked it, and it's probably worth saying that these engines are, once you tear them apart, you could easily replace everything. Like, compared to what the factory suggests like stock wear would be, they're all just worn out. Like, every component on the engine is a little bit worn out. My engine is a little better off, I think, maybe than some. The tolerances for these bearings was just on the loose end of spec and way inside of service limit. So I'm not going to quote the exact number because I can't remember what it is in the manual, but I was way off of service limit. So these bearings that are in here, that's underneath this crankshaft and that are underneath these bearings here, are all serviceable still. There's a little piece of plastic gauge on there, you can see it. There's a little chunk there too. So it's important to have that checked, just because otherwise you may be putting an engine back together that when you get it all together again, you went through all the trouble of checking it, it's just not worth using. So when you get back in there and go to put the bottom end together, make sure you've checked those bearing clearances first. The way that you find out which bearings you need for this engine is laid out in the manual, but you're going to want to check these numbers. So on my engine, they're painted on, they're not stamped. I think there is a stamp in there, but they're painted over, and you coordinate the code on these stampings. So both of those are a B. So BB, and there's a 2 there, you can see. There's an A and a 2 here. The manual shows you how to figure out which color bearing you need. But on my engine, for the main bearings, this is a brown main bearing, and these two are black. And these two engines, or these two bearings, are the same. So they're both, I think, brown. But like I said, I did the plastic gauge on all of them. I did the plastic gauge on these bearings as well, and they're within spec, so they're inside of tolerance, and I'm going to start putting it back together. So assembly lube, I think, is a good idea for these old engines. This is what I'm going to use. This is in German because I'm in Germany, but it's just your basic assembly lube. You can get it, at least in the States, you can get it at any auto parts store. They'll have assembly lube. The reason I like that rather than engine oil is it tends to stay put a little bit better. So on an old engine like this, the oil could roll off, and I might possibly get some scratching because I'm not going to be able to assemble the entire engine at one go. It's going to take me 3 or 4 days in the evenings to do the work. And so assembly lube, good to have. You don't need much. You just put a little bit on the journals when you put them back together again. That's, I think, it for now for the bottom end. First thing to go on is the conrods, and then the after the conrods go on, you go with the main cap and you torque down all of these bolts. Once that's together, that goes in with this balancer, and putting the balancer in requires you to do the tensioner and set the adjustment thing. Like I said, this is all in the manual, but when you do the balancer installation, you have to pay attention to these TCs and THs. So once I get the conrods on and I do the balancer, I will do a video about aligning the balancers. But something else I wanted to do before I get started here is camshafts for this engine. So this one is what was in this engine before, and it's destroyed. Here's a good example. You can see the scoring is intense. There's a really bad flat spot right there. And you can see how scored up it is in that angle. But it's good to know what you're working with in terms of parts. This camshaft that they used in Germany is only a I think 27 horsepower camshaft. So the service manual that I have shows the lift on these lobes as being, I think, 37 millimeters or something. 37.5 maybe. But this one is only like 35. And when I mic'd them after removing it, I thought, no way could that engine have shaved off 2 millimeters of steel and have that still look like, you know, the profile doesn't look that messed up. Come to find out, there's two different horsepower camshafts. You can install them directly. At least that's what the folks here in Germany have told me, that they're directly replaceable. So once you get it, you can put it in the new engine if you have a bigger camshaft without any extra work. You don't have to replace the lifters, you don't have to do anything. You can just put the bigger camshaft in. So that's something to note. Also to think about here when you're taking this engine apart is these lifter blocks. My old lifters were destroyed, so I bought a new pair, or a new used pair off of eBay. When you take them apart, it's a good thing to go through and check. So when you're looking at the lifter block, you want to check the diameter here outside, pull this out of the space, check the diameter here inside, and then the same thing on the lifters. So the inside diameter of the lifter that goes around this, you should check that diameter, because on these old blocks they were a little bit worn, and so I used the old blocks because they were less worn. It's like I said, the old engine, everything's worn out. You're gonna want to mic everything. I just think it's a good idea. I think it's good looking out when you're working with old engines to check everything, because the worst thing you could do is assume that everything is straight and everything is going to be close to spec, serviceable. Then you put it back together and the sound you were taking it apart to fix is still there and you didn't check. If you checked, you have a better idea where it could be coming from. If you didn't check, you still don't know and you wasted your time. So it's a good idea to check those. It's a good idea to check the camshaft. And then I think I mentioned this before, but this oil filter cap bolt functions as a puller for the flywheel there. So I used my old one and destroyed it using it as a puller. This was like $8, I think. $8 is a lot cheaper than the pullers. So thread's the same, no damage. $8. I got a new drain plug with a bigger head on it. The other one I think was 10 millimeters. This one's 17. So for the first step, conrod's going on, and then I'll put on the balancers and the main cap. Once that's on, I'll do another video to show how I aligned them. But just be aware, these bearings for the main journals are impossible to find. Well, I shouldn't say impossible, you can find them, but to replace the brown one, 2 half shells was going to be $100. And then to find 2 half shells in black for these was going to be another $50. $150 is the price of a whole new used engine. So if you're going to spend $150 just on bearings for the crankshaft, in my opinion, it should be a restoration application, not a daily driver. Like, this engine is going to serve as a daily driver for me in the city. I'm never going to take it to a track. I'm never going to open it up for 20 minutes wide open and run through a whole tank of gas, hoping that nothing rattles apart. So it's just not worth it to me. So if you're watching this video because you're thinking about taking the engine apart, you want to build a cafe racer or something, bear in mind, you're going to spend money on bearings. So you might be better off to just leave it put together. So I'll be back.